2019 was a great reading year for me. BookTube really got me back into reading. I read 88 books when my current record while I was in college was about anywhere from 10 to 25 books a year. And that went on a long time, about 6 or 7 years. And I wasn't in school that whole time, so I have no excuse. But this is my top 10 from those 88 books that I read. And to be honest, this was extremely hard to make. And I'm still not sure about the order. I'm also kind of a mood reader, so I feel like a lot of these could be in a different order depending on my mood. But in a lot of the ones that I've read recently are toward the lower end. I'm not sure if that's because they're the freshest in my mind and I had those lovely awe feelings that you get from your favorite books, but I'm going to tell you, so don't take the order too seriously. But these are my top 10 of 2019. The first book on this list, number 10, is the Hidden Legacy series by Alana Andrews. This is a urban fantasy romance series, which I wasn't expecting to enjoy, but because I loved Alana Andrews' I love their Kate Daniels series, which is like an urban fantasy series as well, but it's less on the romance. Less romance, more action. But the in the covers for the Hidden Legacy are pretty terrible. They're like the chests, the man without his shirt on type corniness. But so I didn't read them for years, but then I just was like, oh, I need a palate cleanser type book. So I picked up the first one and read it in like a day. So I went through that whole series in like 3 or 4 days because it was so good. But you have to like romance, I think, to enjoy it. But if you like romance with a side of if you're the type of person that can get into a romance, if it has a lot of other elements with it, like a good world, good magic, or just interesting characters, I think you would enjoy it, because a lot of romance tends to focus entirely on the romance and then not enough on anything else. But I think Hidden Legacy series is pretty good, and I'd suggest not judging them by their covers. Also, my only complaint about the series was there's a lot of, anytime the characters are using guns, the authors tend to ramble on about the different types of guns, which I don't care about at all. So that's my only major complaint about the series. But other than that, they're really good. They're basically about the world that they live in is about, all the really powerful people in this world are called primes, and they all have the really good powers. Like, a lot of them have extremely powerful families. They're all really wealthy because of their powers too. So it's like, if you don't have any powers, you're, poor usually, and not as, like, your whole worth in this world is basically being a prime and being famous. Like, their celebrities are basically all primes and stuff like that. So yeah, the main character has an ability to tell when someone is lying, and it works really well for her because she is a private investigator. So, and then it goes from there. Yeah, and then it's a 3-book series. So that's the basics of it. Number 9 on this list is the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is an epic fantasy series, and it's the first 3 books in her Land of the Elderling series, which is, I think, a 16-book, which is not entirely a series, but they're all in the same world, and she writes them in increments of 3 or 4 books a series, which a lot of them take place from the same character, but then she'll write a series. Then like after the Farseer trilogy, there's the Life Ship Traders, which is a completely different area of the world with completely different characters. So, but I read the first 3 last year and loved them a lot. I think I fell in love with the way she makes you really care about certain characters. I liked these books. They were single first-person perspective fantasy, which is my favorite to read, because I don't have to keep jumping between characters. I know a lot of people these days like multiple character perspectives, but I just want to follow one character or two, maybe three, but don't give me any more than that. So, yeah. Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. So, what I liked most about this series is that one, there's like this power called the wit, which is like an animal bonding where you can bond with animals, but you have to be careful because you could like become the beast basically. It's not a well liked, it's kind of like a taboo subject in this world, but the main character has that ability. And then there's another ability that I really like as well, which is I always like really weird mental type magic or telepathic connections between characters, and there's that in this as well. Like there's this, I don't want to give too much away, but I say that a lot, but it's called the skill where the bloodline, the main bloodline of this kingdom basically, or not really kingdom, but this keep, this main bloodline of this royal family has this ability to communicate telepathically, and they share kind of this mental bond, and it can also be used to as a weapon as well. So, but the whole, so there's a lot of elements in it that I really enjoyed. It is a very slower character-driven story though, so if you're not into that, then I wouldn't recommend it. If even if you're really not, because I'm not a character-driven reader typically, but I loved this series. The next series in the Farseer universe is the Live Ship Traders, which I'm not going to go into really, but I just wanted to mention it was the complete opposite. It was like multiple perspectives, like 7 or 8 total, maybe more, and it was not first person, and I don't enjoy those at all. It's just kind of weird. It's like I could love her first set of books, but I don't like the next ones at all. And one thing that's really interesting about these 3 books being on my top 10 is that a lot of people say they're the worst in the whole series, or they're the least liked, but I freaking loved them. So I think I'm going to like her other series with the same character. So the next book on this list is Nevernight and Godsgrave by Jay Kristoff. I read the whole series this year, but the first 2 were my favorite. They're just really fun. They're dark, but they're, there's mixed feelings about this, and it kind of surprises me for how well the books worked for me. I understand that Jay Kristoff's writing style is not for everyone. I had issues with his writing in a previous adult series of his that I tried to read, the Storm something with a tiger and stuff in Japan, I don't know. But that book I had a little bit of trouble reading because of the writing style, but because of his prose, but I really enjoyed the Nevernight series. This book, like as much as I enjoyed the first 2, it seems like just based on enjoyment level, they should be lower on my list than 7, but no, 8. The 8th book, whoops. But I was very disappointed with the 3rd book, but we're not going to talk about disappointments right now. I still think it's worth reading because it's just really fun. I think you'll know if you like it, like if you just read like a couple pages of it. But Nevernight, they have assassin school, really badass female main character that's out for revenge, shadow magic, a shadow cat. Yes, I love kitties. So very unforgivable. The first book really made me sad. Kind of ripped my heart out at the end. There's some very brutal characters in this book that kind of shocked me at some points about how brutal they got. So, and then a lot of people complain about the footnotes because it brings them out of the story. That didn't happen for me. I feel like it's just whining, honestly. But I would, if you do read them, just listen to the audiobooks, because the footnotes are included in the audio, so you don't even know they're being read to you. And there's some really funny parts in the footnotes, so, and interesting world building as well. they're never you don't need to take them too seriously, really. So, and if you don't want them to take you out of the series, just read it at the end of the page, I guess. I don't know. I think they flow well into the story, but apparently some people think that they're terrible. I think they're awesome, but that's just me. Number 7 on this list is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames. This book was hilarious. A lot of people compare this to like people who like D&D will enjoy this because there's a lot of D&D references. I'm not really familiar with D&D, but I am familiar with video games, and there's a lot of elements that do feel RPG like almost. Kind of like a fantasy novel, a classic fantasy novel mixed with D&D, mixed with like a rock band kind of vibe, which you wouldn't think works well, but it does, like punk rock or something. I don't know. It just kind of reminded me of that. Like, yeah. So I love the characters. I love their relationships and dialogue, but it seems like the authors. There's a lot of corny humor in this, but it's funny. It makes me laugh out loud, so I don't really care. It was very refreshing read overall. Just, I'm glad when you're done reading this, you'll be smiling because it's just good. And it's rare to find fantasy that makes you laugh. And I forgot to mention, that was on my 5-star prediction list a few months ago, and it's one of the ones that are 5 stars, that I did rate 5 stars at the end of the year. My 6th favorite of the year, number 6 on my favorites, is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This is a super villain standalone, which deals with 2 guys that are friends in high school. They're doing research into near-death experiences and gaining super abilities, which they end up becoming super villains. And the whole book is basically about sort of revenge, kind of, and what the powers actually do and how they work. I loved this this book, and I really wish that there was another one with the same characters. I think the second book, which is Vengeful, is different characters entirely, but I loved this so much. It was just so good. But I think it works really well as a standalone. I just wish it was longer. I don't know, but I have it all tapped up because I liked it. I think green means good, and there's a lot of green. And orange means bad. There's one orange. Green and blue, though, are good, so that just shows that I liked it. There's a lot of smart quotes in here, too. I think that's pretty much all of green, because green means intelligent, in my opinion, so, or funny, too. And blue means I liked the writing, or particularly the prose or something, so yeah. Definitely recommended if you like darker characters. The characters in this, like I said, it's more of like a super villain story rather than a superhero story or a superpower story. So, yeah. I'll have a lot of characters now on here. I have a lot of stuff on here that's more about morally gray characters, which I think Nevernight and Godsgrave could be considered morally gray as well. And then Vicious. Like, I think she did such an amazing job with Holland's story arc. And it's really weird because I think she did Holland's arc the best out of any of her characters, when he was not even really the main character. He was more like one of the main villains, but she did a really good job. I was very satisfied. So I was, sometimes when you read a trilogy, you're sad that it's over because you're not going to be able to know what happens to these characters, but I was pretty satisfied. I was like, okay, this makes sense. It could be over, There's like maybe one character where like, damn it, I need to read more about them. Or sometimes you read a series where you're just like, oh god, that was terrible. But this one, I was just very content with the ending and happy at the end. I was like, I'm glad I read this, you know what I mean? Number 4 on my list was a surprise to me, because I loved the first one. I really liked the first book in this series, but I didn't love it for specific reasons, which I'll get into. But the second book in this duology, Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor, was probably the most surprising book that I read this year because of how much I thought it would end up being like the first one. And my major issue, like one of the reasons I love Laini Taylor is her writing is beautiful, and I want to be a writer someday. So I really respect and study her writing, just because if I was to choose one superpower, I'd just like choose the ability to write the way she does, which some people don't really like. It's more purpley and flowery and I don't know, descriptive, but I love it. I think it's a good balance, in my opinion. But the second half of Strange the Dreamer was, like most people say, kind of mushy and slow and insta lovey, where Muse of Nightmares is actually goes in way farther out there. Like, I didn't expect it to go in all the directions that it went, and I really respected the author for that. She was able to create characters that I didn't they weren't very fleshed out in the first book, and make them completely whole in the second, or make them like, she was just really good at fleshing out those characters in the second book, going beyond what I expected completely. And now it makes me excited for more of her writing, because the way it ends, I don't want to say how it ends, but there are several hints throughout Muse of Nightmares that, yes, it is the last book in that duology, but it's not necessarily the last time we're going to see these characters, which makes me happy. The cake is a lie. Sorry. Anyway, I get distracted easily, but King of Thorns and Thorns. But yeah. And nobody really just so I haven't really described what the books are about. So, they're almost fantasy with a tiny, tiny bit of sci-fi mixed in there, because the whole idea is set around this city of Weep that's pretty much been erased from people's minds, but the main character, Laszlo, he remembers that it wasn't always called Weep, and that there's this language that that was forgotten. Everyone forgot. They think it was this mythical place, but it was real. And then when the people from this Weep come and say, we need help, they're like, oh, so it does exist, basically. And I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of there's a lot more to it than that, but I definitely recommend trying it, because even though the second half of the first book is a little insta-lovey romance, it's still really, really good. It's still really unique. I don't think you'll read something that was done in a way that I haven't seen done before. And the second book is just a lot more action, a lot more ideas packed in there that explains everything that, like, the first book's ending felt a little rushed. Like, it focused too much on the romance and not enough on what was going on. And the second book makes up for that big time. So if you're like one of those people that don't want to read Muse of Nightmares because you didn't like the second half, I highly recommend giving it a shot, because I actually got it from the library, and because I didn't know if I was going to like it, I didn't want to buy it, and I loved it. It's on my number 4 for my top 10 of the year. Okay, number 3 on this list is, no, this is the first book, but I listened to the last 2 on audio, so this was on my number 2 last year, I believe. Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence, but this year it's King of Thorns and Emperor of Thorns, which is the second 2. They're very grimdark, morally gray to the extreme main character, a first-person perspective of a very young and deranged young prince, who's basically out for revenge as well, but it's not entirely a revenge plotline, but it is. A lot of people will know if they can handle that book within the first 10 pages, because it does go in directions but nothing is there's no triggers that are so in-depth that they're described in a way that are going to freak people out. It's just the main character is not a good person, and if you have an issue with reading a book about a character who is pretty messed up, like, my whole thing was, like, I picked it up thinking it was more of like just an anti-hero type book, which it is, but it's like way more than that. It's a character who, like, this whole world is kind of messed up. So once you get into it and you realize what the world's like, there really are no good guys and bad guys. There's just bad guys. So, but I loved the character by the end, just because of how far he came and how much you got to know him, and how the author has a lot of lines in the book that really make you think. It's very thought provoking in a way that you don't really know all the time what the character actually wants and what is controlling them, if that makes sense. Or I don't know, but it follows Prince Jorg, who is he's only 10, and it goes back and forth between when he's 10 and when he's 14. But the second two books, which is what is on this list, he's 18, 14, 18, and then I think there's like 4-year gaps in between each one. So, but I love the series. I'm going to reread it soon. I don't know when, because I know that when I listened to the second two on audio, I probably missed a lot, but yeah. I recommend it if you're into something that's, if you do like dark fantasy and you're in the mood for something a little bit more thought-provoking, I definitely recommend checking them out because they're really good. But yeah, like I said, be warned, they are pretty dark. And now we're going to completely change the tone, because my second book is complete opposite in every way of Prince of Thorns, which is Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. The way I base this list, like I said in the beginning, you can't really put it in an order, but I kind of wanted to put it in an order of for me, like what I'd want to reread right now, if I had to reread something. And that's kind of how my top 5 is, sort of. I don't know. But Wondersmith is a middle grade fantasy. It's kind of a whimsical tale of a girl who, so she's from one world where she's looked at as this, I can't remember what exactly they call her, but they think everything that goes bad, I really don't remember. They usually die when they're really young because they're so unlucky, and and everyone blames them for every bad thing that happens around them. But then she's whisked away to another world, and she finds out, well, so the second book is way better than the first. I liked the first book, but the second book, you're really starting to, the author did a good job giving the characters a little more depth, and even the bad guy, you're starting to have, there's some mystery surrounding what's going on with him, and I don't know, it's just a fun, whimsical series. And I got that same feeling of awe that the Harry Potter series gave off. A lot of people compare it to Harry Potter, and it's really not a lot alike Harry Potter, but it does give you that same feeling, if you know what I'm talking. I'm sure every Harry Potter fan knows what I'm talking about, but it's really good. I definitely recommend reading those. Like I said, the second book is superior to the first. It was extremely fun. Good ending, great ending, surprise, twists. Yeah, lots of whimsical, magical stuff going on. Big, giant, talking cats. It's just great. So I highly recommend that one. And number 1, last but certainly not last, like the reason I said earlier is like I feel like some of these books I had just recently read ended up in my top 5. And it might just be because they're the most fresh in my mind, except 2 of them. Blackwing was the last book I read in 2019, and that's my number 1. I got through it so quickly, and I think that the reason I picked this as my number 1 is because of the writing. This series, which I mentioned in my last video a little bit, my TBR, it has this wasteland called the Misery, and this is the part that I liked the most about it. Is the writing was so good in some of these sections that it really creeped me out. It was almost like a fantasy horror in some ways, because all the stuff that goes on in this there's these creatures. I don't even want to say what happens because I feel like people need to read it the first time. And then like the writing and how he describes this wasteland and even the sky, there's like this crack in the sky. And all his descriptions and prose were just, he made like these terrible creepy places sound beautiful, and he made the creepy scenes extremely creepy. Like they actually freaked me out while I was reading it. So I got through the book really quickly. It also has some pretty good lines in it, like some thought provoking or in the world. The magic is interesting. It's a really, like, for one thing, it's really dark, really gritty. Like I did love the writing. I think it was beautiful, but it was probably one of the darker stories I've read all year. Darker worlds, at least. Like the misery in this wasteland, weird things can happen. Some land is like shifting, and some is, there are ghosts out there. There are just all kinds of like creatures that can get into your mind and control you. All, it was a great book. I would like it almost as a standalone. I thought it was that good just to be a standalone. But there are 2 more books which I'm reading this month. So, but yeah, if you're into grimdark right now and you like gritty dark characters, and the main character in the story is kind of an older man. He has this tattoo on his arm of this raven that can just come out of his skin, like pop out and talk to him, and it's really creepy. But yeah, so it's, I don't really want to give too much away about it because I feel like I went into it with a little bit of a description of it. I think the only thing I knew about it was the raven tattoo and what happens to him. I think that's all I knew going into it. But yeah, highly recommend that book. It was great. So that's definitely on a book that I can reread. I don't, the reason I say that I picked books so that I could reread is because I never really reread anything, but I thought that was a good indication of what to pick for these, because considering I don't reread a lot and I want to reread these books, it means that they're probably pretty good and they meant a lot to me. So yeah, well, that was my top 10 of 2019. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you come back. Thank you. Bye bye.